Okay, so let's see. All right, so we're now going to examine these different theories and how they were generated. So the great man approach theory um, was derived from Darwinist theory. So if you remember, Darwin postulated the evolutionary theory that man coming from East. But more importantly, what he looked at was that the evolutionary theory worked upon the presumption of the the dominant traits that worked would be the ones that survived. So that basically, in essence, um, you had to be a great person to begin with to have that position of leadership. So the great man approach really speaks to that whole concept. So um, you had families, primarily the male of the family, brothers, who were ascribed to having special abilities of power and influence, and it was believed that so much so that they intermarried to be able to produce those individuals who rose to be the aristocrats in society. So you could see this reflected in past history in terms of people being eligible for. Hi, Miss McQueen. Welcome back.
Hi, so sorry, I got bumped off.
That's all right. That happens. It happens. No worries. But we're picking up here with the Great Man theory. This is the first one that we're looking at. So you had primarily this theory was based upon men being leaders, and these men coming from families that had a proven track record of being kings.
So
Um,
this slide's not up, huh? We're not seeing anything.
Oops, sorry, my bad. Didn't share. Okay, so right. Hopefully this is you're seeing it now, guys.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yeah. Okay, great. So let me just recap a little bit. So these are the only theories I'm going to be looking at. So the great man approach is dependent upon the whole concept that comes from Darwin, and we're going to see a relationship like this between the general thinking of a period and its influence on the theory that dominated the leadership um, thinking at the time. So Darwin believed in the survival of the fittest type of thing. So only those species that were able to overcome the challenges of the environment would be the ones that would have survived. So simply, the great man theory is about those individuals who were able um, to exhibit the strength required or the abilities required to maintain power and control and influence. And in order to protect that, it was believed that they had to make sure that their bloods were pure, so they would intermarry with other great kings and queens to be able to produce that superior class. That will be, if you ever look at those older movies that featured that features the the leaders of the past, you'd realize that only certain people were eligible to be king or queen, king in particular, of a place based upon their lineage, which is why the importance of lineage was an important element in terms of the arrival into a position of leadership. The theories ignored those great women like Catherine the Great and Joan of Arc because they simply were not holding to that great man theory. Because again, I meant great man theory, so it was gender biased in that particular instance. So with the movement away from that thinking, we started to have the 1900s developed the great man theory giving way to the traits theory. In this traits theory, what they were looking at was a list of traits that individuals would have that would set them aside as being leaders. And again, this was also based upon the concept of you being born with these traits. So these were inherent traits that you had. It assumed that the leaders had a particular trait such as intelligence, height, self-confidence, that differentiated them from non-leaders, thus making them successful. But at the end of the day, the research indicated no such list of traits that was common among leaders who emerged during the period. So that then started to move away from the physical elements of looking at individuals or their families and their genetic connectivities to start to look at other things. And this is where we started to move into the behavioral processes or the behavioral approaches. So the early behavioral approaches started to analyze what managers did on a job and what content of that managerial activity was roles, functions, and responsibilities. So basically what they started to do is to try to get to do observational theory, which is basically go into circumstances and observe what these people were doing and generate some sort of, of correlation between what they saw happening and the ability of that person to be considered a good leader or not. So the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of leaders were compared to find out what behaviors of effective leaders differ from ineffective. So historically, the field of psychology largely influenced studies of behavior. So primarily, we're looking at the 50s and 60s where there was this approach to looking at things. And in my mind's eye, I'm seeing these guys dressed in lab coats with this thing, a clipboard with a pen, and they're checking off certain things, kind of thing, making observational theory, moving along those lines. So from that type of research, they came across these particular institutions here developed some theories. So one was looking at two dimensions of managerial behavior towards subordinates called consideration and initiating structure. So basically, consideration was the acts of the individuals that was seen as being supportive and showing concern to people, and the initiating was the actions that were basically operational in nature, those that were looking towards achieving the goals of the organization. The two dimensions are independent of each other, and so scores can vary between the two. So
your slides disappeared again.
yeah, I had a prompt come up on the PC and shoved me off for whatever reason. Let's get that going. All right, so it's back on now. You're seeing this
Yes, sir.
consideration. All right, so
Yes, sir.
initiating. These two dimensions, they were looked at as being independent of each other, and so therefore you could score positive and negative in both. So that basically they were looking at behaviors that were where you were being considerate to subordinates, and those that you were looking primarily at actions that accomplish the goals of the organization. So, and then they would rate you based upon that. So here we go to another theory, Blake and Morton. They proposed two-factor approach: concern for people, concern for production. Again, splitting hairs between the thing, and again, they looked at the behavior and they tried to measure how many things the person did in relation to that fell into the category of acting on behalf of people and being concerned for them, as opposed to your actions and that will get towards production or output type of things. So basically, the research concluded that the effective manager shows high concern for people and production. So a balance between the two. That's what that theory was looking at. The Michigan study went on to develop three types of behaviors: task-oriented behaviors, relationship-oriented, and participative leadership behaviors. So these were the three different types of behaviors that they started to observe in this Michigan study. And at the end of the day, so in essence, they were looking at how did you balance your time and activities between all three of these elements. So that's something that would take place across the board. And basically what started to happen is that these behavioral approaches were simplistic in nature, and therefore they were trying to tackle a very complex situation by trying to put these little, trying to capture everything in these bivariate activities, or in the last case here, those 3 basic variables that they were trying to measure. And unfortunately, the results that they gained from these observations turned out to be very inconclusive. And more importantly, they were inconsistent throughout the studies that they were looking at. So in essence, the research ignored other situations, or what they call situational variables, and other group processes that were involved in the behaviors or the activities of the organizations. So those behavioral theories started to have very little types of problems. Of course, now we have, because of the observations from the previous theories, now we have situational contingency periods. So this set of theories, situational contingency approaches, looked at the leaders and how they should vary their approaches based upon the context in which they find themselves or the situation. So the situation will determine who will emerge as leader, and the leader being the product of the situation. So this means that the situation drove the leader, and not the other way around. The leader didn't drive or think of the situation there. So obviously, contingency theory tried to incorporate the circumstances under which the managers were behaving, and therefore they were trying to factor in the impact of the environment on the leader's behavior. So they were trying to combine the previous behavioral things with the situational, and this of course led to a lot of problems that came up in terms of the way in which the research started to present itself. So firstly, you had the least preferred co-worker model developed in the mid-60s, and this described the situation, how situations moderated the relationships between leader traits and effectiveness. So basically what they're saying is that a leader comes in with particular traits and they have some level of effectiveness, and then there's a situation that presents itself that will either mitigate your own traits and effectiveness, or it will assist with it. So that theory came up there, least preferred co-worker. As the name might suggest, it's the worst person that you could work with kind of situation. Secondly, the path goal theory, which originated in 1957 by Giorgio Poulos, and he positioned that if you basically spend time trying to show the connection between how personal goals would be achieved and the organizational goals would be achieved, then you'll get the best out of both of them. So the task of the leader was to increase the personal rewards to the individuals in order for the performance, for their performance to improve, so that the organization will benefit. So basically, you can see this is like sort of the beginning of motivational theory approaches that started to come up. So it was basically the job of the manager or the leader to motivate people to see the linkage between the goals of the organization and their connection with the goals of the individual. So if you did well as an individual, it meant that the organization did well as alongside it as well. So that was kind of like that give and take kind of stuff. Again, the problem with these theories was the research didn't support the conclusions that they were coming to. The relationships that they were speaking about were very well, they were very unclear, and they were very basically inconclusive in their findings across the board. So again, the situational theories kind of fell flat on its face, because it again tried to focus on only one element and not on as many elements as possible. That then, of course, gave rise to influence theory. So influence theory first started with Max Weber in the 1920s and to the 40s. Now, in between there, you had World War II, so that kind of interrupted a lot of the techniques that they were utilizing. And this theory spoke to charisma as one of the tools that a manager uses for this. Now, we have to think about this in context now. For those of you who know, Max Weber is German, or was German, because I think he died already. And he was doing this research in the context of looking at the leadership that was around him at that period of time, at the very beginning of the Nazi movement, with the charismatic Adolf Hitler, and the impact that he had on the people of Germany and how they moved forward. So that had a lot of influence on the way in which they viewed leadership back then. And it obviously looked at the importance of being charismatic in relation to that. Of course, the interest in charismatic leadership was not formalized until 1977, when this gentleman, Robert House, proposed the formal theory of charismatic leadership that could be explained by a set of testable variables. And he identified charisma as an attribute that leaders is attributed by leaders, not by the leader himself, but by followers. So you're not deemed to be charismatic because you say you're charismatic, but your charisma is based upon the reaction from your followership, and that followership response is going to be is where some of the issues started to come up from. And of course, they also made a link between the context or what is happening around the leader and the environment at that point in time in terms of what's going on. So generally what we found is that the conditions of social change was going to be something that added to charismatic leadership, because if you have somebody who comes in and speaks what you would like to hear, if you're in a situation where everything seems to be going wrong and nobody seems to have responses or answers for these situations or the problems that we're having, then if somebody comes and starts to speak towards what they posit as solutions to these problems that you want to get sorted out, then there's a greater tendency for people to want to listen to that individual. One could think, for example, of Donald Trump and the way in which he was able to utilize people's fears of what took place under the Obama regime, especially the whole issue of the black vote and how this minority set of people were leading a country with predominantly white people in it. And that kind of lends itself to him speaking to a situation that everybody was thinking, but nobody wanted to speak about openly. And he was able to use his style of leadership to be able to bring people to his following. So again, not necessarily a good thing, but we have to think back in terms of that same kind of technique that was utilized by Germany. In Germany, one of the things that Adolf Hitler was able to do, he was able to find solutions to problems or talk about solutions to problems that everybody in Germany was suffering at that time. And he was able to point everybody's attention to the causative factor, which at the time was because of the Jewish control of the business sector, Jewish control of money. Those are things that he was adamant about, and he was able to take what was popular thinking at that time and utilize it in his speeches and move that concept and that idea moving forward. Now, the problem with charismatic leadership, it really has a dangerous backdrop, because what ends up happening is that when somebody is deemed to be charismatic, the leader is given too much leeway. And therefore, what ends up happening is that with leaders who are unable to curb their baser instincts, you have a situation in which the leaders misuse the power that they have and generally end up delivering visions with empty dreams. So in essence, what you have is a situation where charismatic leadership was seen as being very dangerous in the wider context of things. Not that all charismatic leaders are in fact dangerous, but the potential for that is going to be problematic. Even with people who ultimately had good ideas, and good outcomes, charisma therefore is not necessarily seen as something that is what's what I want to do is is seen as something that is generally a good idea. So therefore, the influence theories kind of went in and out very quickly, especially with the outcome of World War II. It might have been different if Adolf Hitler won or maintained power and didn't the World War didn't end the way it did, because then people have seen the value of charismatic leadership as holding for this. Any of you all ever looked at a film called V for Victory or V for Vendetta? Never looked at that film? It's pretty old. It's from the.
Yes, sir.
Sorry?
I've watched Before Vendetta.
Sorry, say it again?
Same. I was saying that I've watched Before Vendetta already.
Oh, okay, good. All right. That was predicated upon a kind of dystopian type of leadership reality, that kind of thing. So you kind of see that charismatic leadership situation in practice, and how in that circumstance or those circumstances, one person's idea of what the utopia should look like becomes almost this dystopian reality that people have to live in. The similar thing could be looked at in the Hunger Games and other types of dystopian environment movies. You could see that in that type of practice, and interesting that comes up. All right, so this then generated the reciprocal leadership theories. Now, the reciprocal leadership theories emerged in the 1970s. So we have to kind of think about what was happening in the major Western environments or Western culture at the time of the 70s. And for those of you who might be familiar, this was the time of flower power, revolutionary movement, anti-war movements, the involvement in the Vietnam conflict, and the hippie movement, the free love movement, a whole set of movements started to develop this type of ideology that we are all one people, and we need to be working together to get things done. And you see the reciprocal leadership theory starts to reflect that type of reciprocal nature between leadership and followership. So you see it emphasizes the mutual goals of both followers and leaders, and starts to build this whole concept of we are all one and we together will get things done kind of thinking that generated the reciprocal leadership theory. So again, the times influenced the theories and the thinking that's going on there. So these theories posit that leadership is not just something that a leader does to followers. Rather, leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants, values the contribution of participants, shares power and authority between leaders and participants, and establishes leadership as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. So part of this is what is part of the program that we're going to be looking at as well, is going to be related to this relational theory model or reciprocal leadership model. So it's a give and take between people. So these theories that started to emerge here are basically speaking to that whole concept that leadership is a process that involves everybody, not just the leader. The leader is not the primary and, well, what they call the alpha and omega of everything in terms of the organization, but the organization is dependent upon how the people act in it and how the leaders behave in it, that type of stuff. So some of these major theories are the transforming leadership theory, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. The servant leadership theory is going to be examined in a fair amount of detail in one of the presentations coming from the DAF text. Servant leadership is an important takeoff point in terms of how leaders are servants to the leader. Leaders are actually servants to the followership, and followership theory kind of encompasses that as well. All right, so transforming leadership theory is formulated by McGregor in 78, and he defines transforming leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. Now, again, back in this time frame, you're talking again in the 70s and early 70s into 80s, a lot of negative things took place, and therefore the ideologies that were governing is that we need to be better as people, and therefore we need to be moving away from the type of leadership that we saw in the 60s, where leaders were dictating to people what they wanted, and they were hiding the truth about things. So they were encouraging people to be higher levels of ethical values and trying to motivate people rather than dictate to people what to do. So you have all these concepts coming as leaders appeal to followers, higher ideals and moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, humanitarianism, and not to the lesser emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, and hatred. Now it's interesting that this back in the 70s here, late 70s, they were talking about this element of appealing to higher ideals, whereas in the last couple of elections, what I've seen in democratic states, how the individuals won was that they were able to to put into the play people's fear rather than what they were, higher ideals. What they were fearful about became what was most important and what was able to generate the support for particular leaders. All right. Um, Transformational leadership is based upon the assumption that leadership is inseparable from followers, and that speaks to that whole situation, that leadership and followership cannot be separated. You can't be a leader without a follower, and that relationship is essential for that theory to work. And in fact, in reality, no one can be an individual, a leader, without having good followers, and vice versa. You can't get anything done without including other people. All right, and getting these other people to work towards some mutually agreed upon objectives. All right, so those are things that you want to be looking at in that. Um, Power is used to realize common goals and purposes, and not for the purpose of exploitation and manipulation. All right, so this is another concept coming out of this transformational leadership, that power wasn't something that is utilized for personal objectives, but for everybody. So you have power, you use it for, that comes to a point is, with great power comes great responsibility. That thing that they talked about in Spider-Man. Um, so these are all aspects of the leadership theory that is coming from there. Interesting that we see a lot of movies reflecting that type of thinking as well. So these are the end of the day. What they're looking at is people trying to work together to get something really well accomplished. So let's look at these leadership individuals. These are transformational leaders who were seen through history as being transformational. And in each case, what you're looking at here are individuals who are seeking to transform societies that they lived in into a better society than they joined it. So you have JFK, you have Mahatma Gandhi, you have Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, you have Franklin Roosevelt, and we have um, Mother Teresa. Each one of these leaders were trying to transform the realities around them, and they got their followers, or encouraged and motivated their followers to try to look for a higher type of life, a better life for the entire group of individuals that you represented. And that's something that transformational leadership theory speaks to. So transformational leadership theory is contrasted to transactional leadership because what they're looking at is the primary difference. So if we think about transformational leadership as that type of leadership that motivates people to achieve lofty goals and lofty ideologies, transactional leadership is one where people make transactions with others to be able to get people to do things based upon some form of mutual exchange of valued things. Now, what could be those valued things? Better pay, um, more access to power, more influence on things. Primarily, it's very selfish in nature. Um, or it could be that you could have some more open ones, but generally it's always going to be about one person takes the initiative in making contact with others for the purpose of an exchange of value things, transactional. So leaders can engage in both transformation and transactional. So you can get transformation to take place if you're able to trade off. Now you find this happening a lot in politics. Transformational can occur, but at the background of it, there's a transaction that is taking place between the leader and followership. So if we support this transformational act, I expect some transactional things to happen. And that can really be where the nitty-gritty of how the leadership kind of gets it done, because some people will not be motivated to be able to act without some sort of personal benefit for coming their way. You see that happening a lot in politics, especially in the US system. It's pretty clear to see that a lot of the what they call the oh God, we don't have it here, but these people who come into to Washington to influence senators and representatives there to sign on to particular bills because they will get these benefits to their people and they will get their some transactional activities going on. Basically representatives of a different self-interest. So you might have the pharmaceuticals, companies coming in to influence people to agree or to hold back some bills because it makes sense to them. So they come in there to be able to support their particular idea and work on it from a transactional basis, whether or not it's transformational or not. That's kind of thinking that goes on there. Critics of this theory really speak to about its lack of clarity and specificity. So the idea is that the theory is good in what it's trying to say, but it kind of hairy-fairy. That's basically what it's talking, lacking on specifics. And that's something that we're going to look at as well. So servant leadership theory, again, comes up during that period of time. You can think of Mother Teresa in this, with the view that the leader is a servant first to everybody that they have to serve. And this is important because that servant leadership model speaks to leaders as being transient, and that the person who's at the leadership, their job is to prepare others in the organization for them to become leaders themselves. So it's transient in nature. And like with life, nobody is permanent. So therefore, whoever gets into that leadership position becomes a servant to those that follow, because they're the ones who should next be taking charge. So again, it speaks to being transformational, but the transformation is driven by the leader themselves to empower followers to become leaders themselves. And that's the thinking that speaks to it. So servant leadership views institutions in which CEOs, staff, directors, and trustees all play significant roles in holding their institution in trust for the greater good of society. So you're basically, this organization is here for our society to do better things, and I need to prepare people to come behind me or after me to be able to maintain and continue the goals of this organization, because they're seen as being good for society, and there's that reciprocal nature of leadership. So again, reciprocity is going to be an important element of this theory. Both leaders and participants are stewards of the organization who dedicate themselves to taking care of the needs of others. So again, it's very outward looking, and it's really supposed to be more socially responsible, because it's trying not only to make sure the organization survives, but its value in the society that it operates in is something that is of utmost importance. Again, high levels of ethical values, high levels of social responsibility. And the idea is that leadership is transferable, that those who are followers and at one point in time become leaders in the next point at another stage in life. So those are things that this theory starts to speak to, the servant leadership model. And as I said, this is going to be dealt with in a lot of more detail in one of the presentations that we have from one of the chapters from the DAFT. So followership theory, view that followers have been viewed in the leadership literature as sheep in need of a leader. So that generally is some of the older theories always look upon the followership as being that sheep type of individual. So in 92, Kelly redefined followership and leadership and rejects that industrial mode approach in which leaders are superior to followers, but defines the roles of leaders and followers as having equally important but different activities. So we talked about this before. We talked about followership as being a very important element in the whole concept of leadership, and the responsibilities and competencies of followers in holding leadership up, the leader up to the standards necessary to run an organization. So some of the theories that we spoke about, or the followers, alienated followers, the sheep, the yes people, the survivors effective. The idea that this is the Kelly model that I presented in the previous slides in chapter 1. These types of leaderships thinking, or followers, I should say, are the types of individuals that you have to try and move towards being effective followers. So they are going to hold the leader to higher levels of behavior, higher levels of moral behavior, ethical behavior, and that the organization is designed for the betterment of society and the individuals that participate in it. So that's what this theory is focused on in terms of the followership model. And it focuses its attention on the actions of followers, because the followers are the ones who really get the job done. So we talked about this before. Effective followers manage themselves well. They're committed to the organization, especially to its purpose, principle, and the people's outside of it, persons outside. They build their competencies and focus their efforts on for maximum impact. They're courageous, honest, and credible. So courageous in that they would stand up to a leader if the leader is seen as being dishonest or not credible. So those are the kind of things. Reciprocal nature of leadership and followership is that followers see themselves as co-adventurers. So they don't see themselves as sheep. They see themselves as we together trying to get something done. Co-adventurers is a nice word that they utilize for that. Organizational success results from both effective followership and effective leadership. So, and this kind of makes sense. The follower theories here speak to the fact that you can't have an effective organization if you don't have effective membership. If the membership is not effective, then I mean, and I've seen a lot of organizations over time fail as a result of ineffective membership. I will refer to it as membership, but it's so they talk about followership. Regardless of how effective the leadership is, if they are unable to motivate the followership or the membership to do what they're asking them to do, then jump high, jump low. You're not going to get the kind of things or output that you'd like to find in terms of it. All right, emerging leadership paradigms. Leadership theory in the 20th century is using the industrial paradigm. That was in the past. So the industrial paradigm model was where everything is focused upon the output of the organization. So it mirrored the thinking, and this is what I keep on talking about. Whatever is important in general to society, those concepts and ideas would have an impact upon prevailing thinking. So most of the models that came up in the 20th century tended to be focused on the objectives of organizations, of business. So the 20th century mirrored the industrial era in that the theories were structurally functionalist, management-oriented, personalistic in focusing only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self-interest, and individualistic in output. It was male-oriented, utilitarian and materialistic in ethical perspectives. It was rational, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific and language and methodology. Now, I remember looking back at some of the older textbooks that leadership theory was functioned in, and there was a lot of applied mathematics that was utilized in it. It was very male dominated, and it was focused on the achievement of organizational goals and not necessarily looking at what was better for society. So you have to remember that the context in which the theory is being written or created or generated is influenced by the thinking during that period of time. Now, the transformational theories that emerged coming out of that still had some underpinnings into that approach of organizational leadership. And this is where reciprocity becomes an important transition away, because here you're talking about, you're shifting from the industrial focus to post-industrial. So here we're now looking at how does society benefit from what we do in these organizations, and is one reflective of the other, and is one supportive of the other? Because a lot of societies have benefited greatly from the presence of industry, but at what cost? That was another question that was looked upon. Contemporary leadership, therefore, is one that has to look at it from a different perspective, and this is where we start to have theories that attempt to try to look at the changing environments that we're facing. So the environment that we're looking at, 2004 here now, faced with an unprecedented economic, technological, socio-political, and moral, ethical, tumultuous sea of change. So basically what we're looking at is theories that were seated upon very structured activities, trying to describe leadership in those types of industrial and organizational entities, just cannot deal with the current way in which things are happening. So the theories have to be adapting to the change in environment that they're going to be looking at. So the theories themselves have to be more change friendly. So a lot of what we learn in schools and stuff to live a neat life. So this is a departure here. So much of what is taught in school has prepared people to live and lead in a neat, controllable world. But discoveries have indicated that the world is a lot messier than it once was believed to be. Now, any of you all are OCD type individuals? Like things to be done in a particular way, you like your room in a particular manner, your home in a particular manner, you like your car kept in a particular way. Yes, Janet, you like that? See, now think about a theorist who's writing theories or creating theories, and they're writing theories to fit into that nice, neat environment, right, Janet? But the problem is that that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is a messy, messy place. And a lot of what we've been prepared with in the past is no longer applicable to the real world that we're living in. When you go outside there with theory from whatever background you come from, it doesn't meet with environment that you can actually put to action, right, Janet?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So theory has to move with the reality, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to add something else? I see your mic is open.
No.
Yeah. All right. So the world that we're living in is one that changes rapidly. It's chaotic. It's sometimes very difficult to navigate. And when we're trying to navigate situations like what we face now, if we consider all of the recent changes coming out of the pandemic and the world we want some sort of normalcy. But normalcy is a relative thing. Normal is a changing measuring stick. I mean, what is normal? Like for instance, just this classroom circumstance we find ourselves. Normal classes was everybody packing up and getting ready and going down and to a building, and we all sit in a room and we meet each other. Now look at the environment that we're in. It's changing to represent or look at the reality that we're working from. Everybody's working from their own little environments that they set aside some neat place for them or not so neat place. Some of you all maybe, yes, Alicia, McMurray?
So my opinion on this whole thing, when you're saying normal, I don't believe there's anything that is normal in this world.
Right.
That was my opinion.
Right. Well, no, your opinion is correct because normal is relative. Normal for you is not normal for me. All right. And then what we have is some generally accepted norms in our societies. But it does not mean that those norms will be shared by everybody in society. There will be some people who are not in that particular frame of reference, but norm is a relative statement, or normal is a relative statement. So this is where we have some different theories that come up. So we have the chaos systems. Chaos theory is a weird theory. It's a theory that tries to look at the world as the chaotic place that it is and try to develop a form of thinking that allows us to be able to work with the chaos around us. So I don't know if any of you all ever came across the phrase chaos theory. So in the world of chaos and chaos systems, the world is looked at as turbulent, ever-changing, risky, always challenging. It is echoed, challenging is echoed, sorry. It's always changing in terms of expanding and then contracting, and they started to speak about quantum exercises and all this kind of thing. The chaotic world is a quantum world, a world of wholes, not parts. It is a connected world in which relationships are everything. It is a world filled with strange attractors of meaning and force fields that help shape the behaviors of individuals and organizations. A very interesting quotation from 1999, the quantum world. So let's get to the theories that came out of this. We could go on about it, but the main thing is that you can't control this world. The circumstances around us, regardless of how much we would like to control things around us, you really can't control the world around you. It's beyond what we can do as individuals or even as groups. All right, so there's some basic concepts that you need in order to operate in this chaotic world. Sensitivity to change or sensitivity to initial conditions, also called the importance of initial conditions, implies that how something begins greatly determine where it ends. So where things start, we need to be aware of that initial condition because that kind of determines where we're going to end up. Again, this is, if you think about it from the perspective of a person, understanding where you began also has something to do with where you're going to end up. So that's something. Relationships and connections are so critical that none of us exist independent, because I should say, none of us exist independent of our relationships with others. And that's actually true. Another way to think of that concept of relationship and connection is the concept of andness. When you make a connection with somebody, you're anding with them. So it's like texting. He created this idea of anding. So you and somebody will work on something, or you or this and that will have to produce a solution to a problem or an issue or a circumstance that you find yourselves. So you have the and concept in chaos theory, and then you see it being utilized all the time. So there's no right or wrong, and there may be some partial right and some partial wrong, but that whole concept of absolutely right and absolutely wrong is something that you can't quite get, you know, the dualism situation. So who's and other things coming in here, but the idea is that ending becomes an important element of us being able to cope with the system, the chaos system, and something being absolutely right or wrong is not something that we're going to be have. It's something that we're going to have to avoid looking at. It speaks to the fact that the world is not black and white. It's shades of gray, and a lot of us have problems with that black and white situation. Wrong and right is relative. I think it was Alicia who just spoke about it. The same thing. That's the same concept. Normal is relative. So the concept that we're looking at here is relativity that we're looking at. So if you're trying to solve a problem in this system, the tendency is generally to try and find a single answer to it. But everybody is looking at this problem and everybody has a different perspective of what the problem is and how it could be solved, and therefore coming up with a likely response or solution to the problem may not be best coming from only one individual. It's likely that a host of responses should come up and to try and treat that problem. And it is more unlikely that a combination of partial solutions from everybody will be what is going to bring a solution to bear. And this is something that is especially difficult for people in leadership, because if you're unwilling to give up control to other people around you to provide partial solutions, then there's a tendency for us to not want to not come up with these other options that are available. All right, so the partial solution situation is one that a lot of people don't like. So you have a partial solution that is available that we don't like it because we're looking for something to fix everything. Problem is that it can't, because the circumstances that you're trying to fix is not something that is easily surmountable, because there's so many different facets to the issues that you're facing. All right, the complexity of the problem. Let's look at this last quote piece here. The complex nature of these problems, partial solutions may be all that you can be expected to develop, but you'll be surprised at how much several partial solutions can accomplish. So what they're trying to say to you is that in this chaotic environment, you need to be aware that you may not be able to fix everything, but a lot of your problems can be solved with a partial solution. So like patchwork kind of thing, if you think about it. But we have to stop thinking it from that type of derogatory term, because if we say, okay, this is just patchwork, it means that it's temporary, but it's not. That temporary patch is probably going to become a more permanent fixture in being part of the solution moving forward to a bigger problem that faces an organization or faces society. Because if you think about, like, let's say we accept that global warming is a huge issue for our country or for the world, then how do we fix that? It's a very complicated issue that faces countries around the world. How do we expect to do something from our end to help solve the issue of global warming? Or is it that it's a patchwork of different partial solutions being utilized around the world by different countries, addressing the issue that will all come together as a solution that helps to alleviate the immediate threat of these particular situations? Those are the kind of things that is looking at. Now, this is another part of the chaos theory. The chaotic world is filled with self-organizing systems. That is, collections of living things whose behaviors are constantly being shaped by the surrounding environment and by the actions of those around them. Now, this sounds vague, but think about how peer groups shape the behavior of its participants or the profound impact that a culture has on its environment or society. Now, I like to think about this from the perspective of animals, and insects in particular come to mind. So if you ever look at ants, for example, ants seem to always be able to survive regardless of what you do. You could spray the place with any kind of chemical, they will survive. They will have losses, yes, but they will reorganize and reshape their lives and work around the environment that they find themselves working in. So this is what chaos theory is telling us, that the world has its own way of organizing itself to continue moving, to continue living and existing and succeeding. And basically, what it's saying is that this self-organizing system, self-regulating system exists naturally in our environment, even among ourselves, because things can go wrong, but yet still we tend to work and find a way around it naturally, and that's a kind of system that sits um, inside ourselves, that we will automatically gravitate towards a particular set of behaviors and solutions automatically. Almost what they refer to as uh, God, I can never remember the terminology for this, but kind of organically we end up doing what we have to do to be able to think, to survive. Try not to underestimate the influence that participants in the organization have on each other, even if they are not designated leaders, because basically an organization will start to work according to how they find themselves being able to. So um, they will self-organize, they'll self-regulate, and they will start to develop um, efficiencies within that organization, even in the absence of a leader. And I don't know how many of you all ever operated in an environment without a clear leader in it, but that's actually quite true, because there are lots of instances in which organizations that were in extended positions or timeframes without a leader started, they just continued doing what they had to do and survived, even without a leader being present. Have any of you all ever had that experience, especially in public sector?
So I was in
Janet?
that situation. I'm in the public sector. We
Right,
didn't
yeah.
have a leader for almost a year, but we were experienced and we know what we had to do. We just did what we had to do until they sent our administrative assistant for us.
And then with the person coming in, did it change much?
Um, no, because we were responsible and we know what we had to do.
Correct. And that's because
Actually,
everybody,
that person got some opposition because they tried to lay down some new rules and regulation that we didn't stand for.
yeah, and that meant
Yeah.
that that person came in and met a cultural, what was called we call it organizational culture that they can't surmount. All right.
Yeah.
Maybe they need to try a different way to get it done. Maybe from letting you all see what the benefit of it would be for everybody. Because you definitely, it's staying up to your own, you all could have developed some bad habits. Um,
Yes, we would.
yeah,
We were
especially in the
going home
public
early
sector.
once we finished work.
Well, I mean, but at the end of the day, wasn't the work being completed in a timely fashion?
Yes, we were running the place, but just we were going home early as soon as there was nothing to do.
Right. That's the point of being in a place, if it had nothing to do, we're doing marking time, right? That's something. All right. Okay. So authentic leadership. This is another model. New development in leadership is a review of many reciprocal leadership models, post-industrial research leading some scholars to see an underlying theme in all of these approaches, which they call authentic leadership. So the authentic leader, what is the authentic leader? Authentic people are at the center of authentic leadership. Kind of a so what in essence they're saying in this particular thing, the organizations require authentic leadership as the confluence of positive psychological transformational leadership and moral ethical leadership. And the authentic leader as someone who is confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future-oriented, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. That's like a hairy-fairy type of definition of who an authentic leader would be. Can we think of people who fall in that category? Anybody? Confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future-oriented, gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. That's who they want as an authentic leader. Interesting. This other author here, Velo, persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity in that they know who they are, what they believe and value, and they act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with others. That sounds nice too. Very good. The concept of authenticity adds much to our standing of leadership.
So is that possible to meet all those criteria?
Well,
think
again, it's a theory, and this is
Okay.
one of the things that I've always spoken about with these authentic leadership theories, and there's one other that we have to look at as well. The last one. They've set a very high bar for us to aim towards, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. What we have to do is be realistic in people and know that people will fail, right? So it describes the authentic as a root construct, meaning a baseline. At the very base or core of what constitutes profound positive leadership in whatever form it exists. It recognizes the need to understand the powerful impact of hope, trust, and positive emotions, and the need to understand their attitudes and behaviors. Now, a lot of this, you tend to find some religious organizations actually have people who can level up to this type of thing. But when you start to get into organizational leadership and even political leadership, this is where we start to see it from that. But even from the religious standpoint, you have people who fall well below this construct, to speak. But again, it's an ideal against which we are going to measure reality. And it gives you something to work towards if you think about it from that. Followers are especially important to authentic leadership because they kind of like authentic leadership includes authentic followership as well, namely followers who follow the leader for authentic reasons and have authentic relationships. So this authentic word all over the place. So basically, the two elements here: the leader needs to be authentic and followers need to be authentic. We know that we always have people in organizations who claim to be followers, but they're not really followers. They're just there because either they have nothing else to do, or they're looking for the opportunities that they can get from it. They can be sycophants and that type of. We know about those types of followerships that exist or followers that exist there. The authentic leader, as described by Gardner: transparency, openness and trust, guidance towards worthy objectives, and an emphasis on follower development. So these look a little more attainable, not so. I think it was Janet. Transparency, openness and trust. You can develop trust. Guidance towards worthy objectives.
Yes.
And an emphasis on follower development, which means I'm mentoring people in the organization to become leaders in the future, moving forward. So that's motivational in that sense, rather than the kind of hairy-fairy ones that we talked about. All right. Building follower self-efficacies, creating hope, raising optimism, strengthening resilience. Actually, if any of you all took part in the meetings with the new president of Constant, Dr. Henry? None of you all did? Okay.
No, sir.
I didn't.
You did or didn't? I was looking for people who did. Esna? No?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No.
Okay, I was looking for more for people who did. Because in meeting this individual, he comes from a very broad leadership background. He has leadership in other universities, particularly Caribbean universities, leadership at the UN and UN connectivity. So he comes from a very um, broad, deep background of leadership in a wide area. He's an economist as well. And he also participates in leadership in economic activities and economic organizations. So he comes in, and some of the things that he's trying to build with the people around him is creating hope for the future, raising optimism, and strengthening resilience. So some of these things that they talk about here, they high ethical and moral values, honesty, integrity. These are more measurable things that they talk about as opposed to the very broad definitions that were given earlier on here in the definition of authenticity that we met before. So if we get to authentic people do not fake their leadership. Right? Or authentic leaders you will know somebody who's faking it. Authentic leaders do not take on leadership roles or engage in leadership activities for status, honor, or other personal gains. That's actually quite true. An authentic leader knows that what they're getting into is not something that is going to help give them that kind of status, because they know that leadership is hard work. Authentic leaders are originals, not copies. Authentic leaders are leaders whose actions are based upon their values and convictions. That is also very true. These are all ways in which you can measure the thing. The important to remember that authentic leaders can be directive or participative and can even be authoritative. Their behavioral styles per se is not what necessarily differentiates the authentic from the inauthentic. Basically, what you're looking at is their motivations behind what they're doing. So their style of leadership may not be that you like, but at least they are authentic. That is what they're speaking about here in terms of authentic leadership. And it all hinges upon their own personal belief structures, coinciding with the wider society of what we consider to be higher values than everybody else around us, and trying to pull everybody in that light moving forward. So those are the kind of things that authentic leadership speaks to. And transformational leaders have a tendency to be authentic. And basically, you can get a whole set of subsets of this type of behavior going on. But the successful ones would have to be authentic and transformational as well. They can speak to each other from that perspective. All right, so they're going on here about authentic leadership and transformational leadership being connected to each other, because again, transformational leadership speaks to that whole concept of transforming organizations and transforming individuals and transforming followers. So if you have somebody who's authentic, who's leading off a transformational movement, then that authentic leadership will focus its attention on making sure that we hold to a particular set of standards, we behave in a particular way, and we make sure that we leave people in place who are capable of moving the organization forward in the absence of the individual. Because as with everything, nobody lives forever, right? I mean, that immortality is something that doesn't exist. All right. Okay. So in terms of summarizing the chapter, we looked at the whole concept of leadership theory and how it was looked at from the past to where we look at it now. We've looked at a number of the theories that emerged throughout the period, and generally one of the things that we could talk about is the inconclusive and vague nature of a lot of the theories that we've been paying attention to or we examined. Even the last authentic theory, leadership theory, um, still speaks to something that's really like pie in the sky type of situations that posited into the environment. So those are some of the things that we want to look at. We also looked at the world, the chaos theory and system theory, and notice how that approach is different than the kind of linear systems that we looked at before. And in the new world, the rate at which change is taking place requires that we have to have systems that can address and work in circumstances like that. I mean, just thinking about the pandemic in itself and the way in which the world had to pivot it to be able to organize themselves to be able to survive in that world. Because if you didn't change, you fail. I mean, look at how many businesses out there did not make organizational changes and ended up in a situation where they find themselves um, at a loss and even shut down. That makes sense. So obviously, um, it requires that we have to look at the world differently than what we were paying attention to for. Janet, something you wanted to add?
So I was just gonna say, even some of our students had to make change because I was one of those who would never do an online course. I would always
And
do face to face, and
yeah,
I had to adjust the online, and now I refuse to go back face to face. So
no,
I
no,
changed to the yeah.
interesting. Why would you not return to face-to-face sessions?
Um, so I feel, well, I had a fear of doing online because I wondered if I would fail because I always like to be in front there with the teacher asking questions and taking notes. But I realized I could have done the same thing online, and I didn't fail any courses. Actually, I did well. So I
Right.
said, look, maybe I should just stay online and finish up.
Well, and I think one of the things that you would have realized, Ms. Mendoza, is that the responsibility of being a good student does not reside with the teacher. It resides with
Yeah,
you,
yeah,
right? The teacher is really supposed to facilitate your understanding of material. And that's their job, that's their function across the board. That makes sense?
yeah.
So
That's it.
the absence of them in front of you should not have influence, and that's a good thing. It means that you have always been a good student. It's just that you had a connection with, you connected your success to the presence of somebody who need not be.
Yes,
But it
yes, sir.
doesn't mean that they're absent from your learning thing. I don't, no, they're not. They're here, but they're here in a different way.
Yes.
They're with you in a different way. In fact, I would say in the online environment, they're even more available than they were before. Think about it. When you go to the e-classroom, the material is always there in front of you.
Yes.
It's not ever not of, well, yes, I understand that the other day we had some system breakdowns and that type of stuff, but barring that, the material is always there for you to engage with. All right.
Yes, because face to face, you have to when you go to class, then you get the material.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to wait on that individual to be there, whereas
Yeah.
your lecturer should be more available to you now, or
Yes.
at least more available to you when you need it. All right.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we ended up looking at a lot of stuff in this particular presentation. So that's why I said here this presentation is pretty long. You're not required to memorize any of this stuff, but really to just read, ruminate, I like the use of that word, on the ideas and see what your thoughts and feelings are towards the material. try to understand as much as you can, and trust me, there are no examinations for you to stress over. So that kind of ends on a good note. So the idea is to look at one of the things that I found useful in this process was looking at how world activities and world trends influence theoretical underpinnings, and that was really that, like how Darwinism affected the great man theory and trade theory, how the 70s psychedelic movements impacted upon the relational theories, how the end of the industrial era or the movement out of the industrial thinking led to the chaos theory and all that. Those things are reflective of, and again, it makes sense because theory is developed in the context of the environment it is emerging in. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the theories aren't absolutely apart from each other. That makes sense? All right, so I noticed that Ms. Mendoza has been making a lot of contributions. That doesn't mean others can't make contributions and ask questions. All right, so at this point in time, what I'll do is I'll ask, do you have any questions that you want to ask? Anybody else besides Ms. Mendoza?
So I just have one little question and then I'm done.
Yes, Ms. Mendoza.
Citations for this course, is it APA?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I'm finished.
When you need to use it, you use APA formats.
All right, so thank you.
Not a problem. All right, let me see. Did anybody join us? We seem to have lost somebody. All right, nobody else has questions. Sparkle said she wasn't making it. Anybody heard from Abigail? Or Miss Ramsmere? Miss Younglaw messaged me, so I know what's going on with her. So I take it nobody else has questions that they want to ask.
Good, sir. Are we still meeting after class?
You and I, yes. Okay. And then Tanisha wants to ask me something, so I'll deal with you first, Friday, and then I'll message Tanisha to come back in. That sounds all right?
Yes, sir.
So what's about dealing with me first and then deal with him? Because it's like 1 minute.
Okay, Tanisha. Yeah. Zuriel, would you jump back into class, jump out, and then jump back in? Would you be okay with that? Because we might actually take a little more time. Miss Bonnet?
Yes.
That'll be fine. All right, Friday. Bonnet? Bonnie? Yes, miss? You had your hand up.
Oh, sorry, sir. I didn't realize my mic was still muted.
Oh, okay.
And I was walking away. Anyways, question. Do you consider yourself to be a leader? And if yes, what type?
Me? A leader? Yes. I in the context of the classroom, I'm a leader, yes. And what type of leader? I don't know. My style of leadership is one that's more motivational, especially for this course. My objective is to motivate you guys to want to do better, to want to learn, and that means it's a nature of motivational, transformational type leadership, but it's also based heavily upon the nature of the relationship we develop in the classroom setting. That makes sense? And of course, I have to maintain ethical values and standards based upon, just common sense behavioral things when working with other people, and based upon the legislation that governs the behaviors of teachers in classrooms. Regardless of the fact that we are online, there are certain behaviors that I can't engage in because they're not mitigated by, well, they are legislated in terms of classroom behaviors or classroom management. That makes sense? So there are rules to follow, and I hopefully follow the rules. Now, when I used to teach, when I teach face to face, there's a little leeway there. So I've been historically known to swear a little bit when I'm teaching face to face. But I've desist from doing that, especially since we have recordings of classes. Oh, you're laughing now? Okay, go ahead. All right, so if there are no questions, I will stop the recording and I'll post the recordings up to class as soon as they finish processing. Anybody else has a question they want to ask? No hands? All right. I'm stopping the recordings for now.